Millionaire CEO laughed at a homeless stranger until that same man saved his life. The man in the tailored coat stepped out of his sleek black car, the engine still purring as his driver waited at the curb. The December wind cut through downtown like a knife, but the executive barely noticed. His expensive wool shielded him from more than just the cold. "Excuse me, sir," came a weathered voice from beside the marble steps of the office building. "Could you spare some change?" "I haven't eaten in. Get a job," the executive snapped without even looking at the man. "I'm tired of you people thinking the world owes you something." The homeless man, maybe 50, with graying hair and clothes that had seen too many winters, didn't argue. He just nodded quietly and stepped back against the building, clutching a worn backpack. But the executive wasn't done. The stress of the day, failed deals, mounting pressure, it all came pouring out at this easy target. "You know what your problem is?" He turned back, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "No ambition, no drive. I built everything I have from nothing while you sit here begging for handouts." A few passers-by slowed to watch the scene, their faces showing mixtures of discomfort and disgust, not at the homeless man, but at the executive. "Sir, I understand you're frustrated, but—" the man began softly. "Don't lecture me," the executive interrupted. "You're a waste of space, a leech on society." He pulled out his wallet, making a show of counting his cash. "See this? This is what happens when you don't give up at the first sign of trouble." The homeless man's eyes flickered with something, pain, maybe, or recognition. But he said nothing, just watched, as the executive stormed into his building, leaving a trail of cruel words hanging in the frigid air. What the executive didn't know was that this encounter had been witnessed by someone who would remember every word and who knew more about building empires than he could imagine. Inside his corner office, Thomas Sterling tried to focus on the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk. Sterling Industries was hemorrhaging money, and the vultures were circling. 3 hostile takeover attempts in the past month. Stock prices dropping daily. Board members whispering about replacing him. He'd been working 18-hour days for weeks, surviving on nothing but coffee and stubborn pride. Sleep was for the weak. Food was for people who had time to waste. By 11 p.m., the building was empty except for security and the man whose name graced its walls. Thomas's head pounded with exhaustion. His vision blurred from staring at numbers that refused to cooperate. He stumbled out into the December night, his driver long since dismissed. The parking garage was 4 blocks away, a walk he'd made thousands of times. Tonight, though, each step felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Halfway there, the world started to tilt. Thomas stopped, pressing his hand against a brick wall as his vision went white around the edges. His heart hammered irregularly against his ribs. The cold air burned his lungs, but he couldn't seem to get enough of it. "Just tired," he muttered, but his body disagreed. The sidewalk rushed up to meet him as consciousness flickered like a dying bulb. The last thing Thomas remembered was the taste of blood and the distant sound of footsteps hurrying toward him. When awareness returned, Thomas found himself lying on something soft, a sleeping bag, with a coat that wasn't his draped over his chest. The smell of wood smoke filled his nostrils, and orange firelight danced against brick walls. "Easy there," said a familiar voice. "You took quite a fall." Thomas turned his head and froze. The homeless man from earlier was sitting beside him, stirring something in a dented pot over a small fire contained in a metal trash can. "You," Thomas whispered, his throat raw. "Me," the man confirmed, not looking up from his cooking. "Found you passed out on 5th Street about an hour ago." Thomas tried to sit up, but his head spun violently. "Why did you? After what I said." After you humiliated me in front of half the city. The man's voice held no anger, just tired understanding. Because you looked like a human being who needed help. For the first time in years, Thomas Sterling was speechless. The homeless man ladled soup into a chipped mug and handed it to Thomas. Chicken broth from the shelter. Nothing fancy, but it'll help. Thomas stared at the offering, his pride warring with his body's desperate need. I don't understand. Why would you help someone who treated you like garbage? What's your name? The man asked instead of answering. Thomas, he said without thinking. I'm Robert. The man settled back against a cardboard windbreak. And 12 years ago, I might have said the same things you did today. Something in Robert's tone made Thomas look at him more carefully. Despite the weathered features and worn clothes, there was an authority in his bearing, a way of speaking that suggested education and experience. What do you mean? Thomas asked, sipping the soup and feeling warmth spread through his chest. I mean, I used to be like you, Robert said simply. Successful, wealthy, absolutely convinced that poor people were poor because they didn't try hard enough. Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December air. Used to be? I ran a tech company, started in my garage. What kind of tech company? Thomas found himself genuinely curious. Software development, built it into something substantial. Robert's voice carried a hint of old pride. How substantial are we talking? Robert met his eyes across the fire. Let's just say, I had employees, investors, government contracts. I was doing very, very well for myself. So what happened? Market crash? Bad product launch? I trusted the wrong person. The way Robert said it made Thomas's stomach tighten. Who? My CFO, man I'd known since college. Robert stirred the fire, sending sparks dancing. I put him in charge of finances while I focused on the big picture. Thomas nodded. That's smart delegation. Is it? Robert's laugh was bitter. While I was making deals, he was systematically stealing from me. Moving money offshore, cooking the books. Jesus, how much are we talking? Robert was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. $50 million. Thomas nearly choked on his soup. 50 million. You're telling me you lost $50 million? Gone overnight. By the time I figured it out, federal agents were at my door. Thomas thought Robert had shared the worst of his story. He couldn't have been more wrong. Wait, Thomas interrupted, his mind reeling. Federal agents? FBI. When 50 million disappears, they assume the CEO is involved. Robert's voice turned flat, especially when your CFO vanishes into thin air. But you were innocent, right? Try proving that when all the evidence points to you. Robert pulled his coat tighter. 2 years of investigations, legal fees ate up everything I had left. Thomas stared at him in disbelief. They actually investigated you for fraud? Grand jury, depositions, the works eventually proved I was the victim, not the criminal. Robert shrugged. But by then, the damage was done. What do you mean? Ever tried getting a job after being on the front page as a corporate criminal, even after you're cleared? Robert's voice grew hollow. Nobody wants to hire the guy who got away with it. Thomas felt sick imagining it. So you lost everything. The company, my house, my reputation, 20 years of work, Gone. Robert stared into the flames. I thought that was rock bottom. There was something in Robert's tone that made Thomas look up sharply. Thought? Robert reached into his jacket with trembling hands and pulled out a worn photograph. I had no idea how much further I could fall. But Robert hadn't yet revealed the tragedy that shattered him completely. Thomas looked at the photo in the firelight. A beautiful young woman with Robert's intelligent eyes and a radiant smile stared back at him. "Your daughter," Thomas said quietly. "Emily. She was 16 when the scandal broke." Robert's voice grew thick. "Smart as a whip, headed to MIT on a full scholarship. She must have been proud of you." Robert's face crumpled. "She was ashamed of me." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "Why?" "Kids can be cruel, Thomas. When your father's face is on the news as a suspected criminal." Robert's hands shook as he held the photograph. "She went from popular honor student to social pariah overnight. That's horrible. The whispers at school, the pointing, the way her friends' parents looked at her." Robert's voice cracked. "She couldn't handle the shame." Thomas waited, sensing more pain was coming. "My daughter, Emily, she was bright, talented, full of potential. But when my world collapsed, hers did too. She couldn't handle the whispers, the shame, the pressure. She started making choices that hurt her more than they helped." Robert's voice dropped to a whisper. "I was so consumed with fighting the charges that I didn't see how much she was suffering." "Oh God, Robert. I tried everything. Rehab programs, therapy, begging her to hold on. For a while, it seemed like she was getting better. She laughed again, even talked about going back to school." Thomas caught the past tense and felt dread settle in his chest. Robert was quiet for so long that Thomas thought he might not continue. Finals week of her senior year. The stress got to her. Robert closed his eyes. "I got the call no parent ever wants to receive." Robert's voice broke completely. She was 18 years old and she was gone. Just like that. And with her went every reason I thought I had to keep fighting. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He set down his soup, his heart breaking for this man who'd lost everything that truly mattered. "Robert, I can't imagine losing a child." "You want to know the worst part?" Robert looked directly at him, eyes holding unbearable pain. "I barely knew her. I was so busy building my empire that I missed her childhood, her dreams, her fears." Thomas thought about his own empty life, his isolation. By the time I understood what really mattered, it was too late. Robert's voice was barely audible. And that's when I learned the cruelest truth of all. "What's that?" "You can build the biggest empire in the world, but if you lose your family in the process, you've built nothing but a monument to your own selfishness." They sat in silence for several minutes, the fire crackling between them. Thomas felt something fundamental shifting inside him, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. "Robert," Thomas said, finally, "what was your company called?" For the first time, Robert met his eyes directly. "Lynn Technologies." Thomas's blood turned to ice. Lynn Technologies. He knew that name. Everyone in the industry did. It had been one of the fastest growing tech companies in the country before its spectacular collapse. Robert Lynn had been featured on magazine covers, hailed as a visionary, worth nearly $500 million at his peak. "You're Robert Lynn," Thomas breathed. "The Robert Lynn was," Robert corrected gently. Now I'm just a guy trying to survive another winter? Thomas stared at the man in front of him, this brilliant entrepreneur who'd built an empire and lost everything, who was now sharing soup with a stranger in an alley. When I saw you collapse tonight, Robert said quietly, I recognized the signs. The exhaustion, the stress, the way you were pushing yourself past human limits. I've been there, Thomas. I know what it looks like when a man is about to lose everything because he's forgotten how to be human. The weight of Robert's words settled over Thomas like a blanket. Here was a man who'd achieved everything Thomas thought he wanted, only to lose it all, and in the process, learned something Thomas was just beginning to understand. But you saved me, Thomas said. After everything I said to you today, after I treated you like you were nothing, you still helped me. Because I learned something on my way down, Robert replied. Success without compassion is just elaborate failure. Wealth without humanity is poverty of the worst kind. And sometimes the person who needs saving isn't the one sleeping in an alley. It's the one sleeping in a penthouse alone. For the first time in years, Thomas Sterling began to cry. But what Robert didn't know was that the man he'd just saved was about to make a decision that would change both their lives forever. 3 days later, Robert was surprised to see Thomas approaching his usual spot by the building. But this time, Thomas wasn't rushing past. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression Robert had never seen before. Humble, almost vulnerable. I've been thinking about our conversation, Thomas said, offering Robert one of the cups. About what you said, about success and compassion. Robert accepted the coffee gratefully. And I realized something. You saved more than my life that night. You saved my soul. Thomas sat down beside Robert on the concrete steps. I want to help you, but not the way you think. Robert raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I don't want to give you charity. I want to give you opportunity. Thomas pulled out a folder. My company is dying, Robert. We're hemorrhaging money because we've forgotten what we're supposed to be doing. We're so focused on profits that we've lost sight of innovation, of actually serving people. What does that have to do with me? Thomas met his eyes. I want you to help me save it. Not as a favor to a homeless man, but as a partnership between 2 businessmen who understand both success and failure. Robert was quiet for a long moment. You don't even know if I'm still capable? The man who built Lin Technologies from nothing? Who turned a garage startup into a $500 million company? Thomas shook his head. Robert, you're the most qualified person I know. The fact that you lost it all just means you understand the real cost of the choices we make. A year later, Sterling Industries announced record profits and a complete corporate restructuring focused on employee welfare and sustainable growth. Robert Lin, now Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, stood in his office looking out at the city where he'd once slept in doorways. On his desk sat 2 photographs, one of his daughter Emily and one of the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Emily Lin Memorial Foundation, which provided support for families facing hardships and loss. He knew he couldn't bring Emily back, but he could honor her by making sure no other family felt as alone as he and Emily had. Thomas knocked on the door. Ready for the board meeting? Ready, Robert said, straightening the tie that had come with his first suit from his new life. As they walked toward the conference room, Thomas reflected on that December night when a homeless man had taught him that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or buildings or stock prices. It was measured in the lives you touched, the people you lifted up, and the wisdom to know when you needed saving yourself. Sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you least expect. A reminder that true success isn't about building an empire, but about learning to be human again. And sometimes our greatest teachers come disguised as our greatest challenges. If this story reminded you that everyone has a story worth hearing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share a moment when someone unexpected changed your perspective. Join us for more soulful stories that find the extraordinary in the ordinary.